Just watching the northeastern coast fly past is something I remember just seeing a lot of it. You know, another big memory is just being in the back of the car and just watching the country pass me, you know, and just kind of looking at weird signs and weird towns and wondering about them, and you know, just like this idea of what else is out there, you know, because all the places we went were so different than where I was living at the time, for the most part. So I think that was kind of the point too. My name is Michael Shaeffer, and this is Getaway Car. It's a tribute to my mom, but also a show about a car. Usually my work is more directed at outside things and less personal, more about like pop culture or just the world that I find myself in and trying to understand that and process this. This is the first time in a long time where I kind of spent a big chunk of my time digging into me and who I am and why I am who I am, and a lot of it comes back to this car. And my mother passed away last March, which kind of changed the whole show that I was going to do. And I knew I wanted to do something to kind of talk about that because I needed to figure that out. And the easiest way of me doing it was talking about a car. So it all kind of started with that and this journey when this car was purchased and how it kind of altered both our lives. The thought process behind this show was a way for me to kind of process the loss of my mother. And as I was going through boxes of photos and images and just stuff, like just ideas from the past, like I kept coming across all these pictures of vacations we would go on, all these trips we would go on. And it all goes back to this car. And I felt like that was a good springboard to kind of like start the process of going through things and understanding things. And what it opened up was the idea of like who I am and why I am now, and like in this feeling of wanderlust that I think I always have. And it stems from my mother, who bought this car, and when she bought this car, literally every weekend we'd go on these road trips. And they were usually places that were kind of strange and inexpensive, which is a big part of it. So we just find ourselves in like places like Amish country, Pennsylvania, or like Connecticut whaling museums, or like once a year we do a trip to Florida. So that was like the big trip, but we never went to like the big places in Florida. It was always like stranger places. And I think that was just kind of I think it kind of built up this love of mine of like weird nostalgia in American culture. But I don't know, this is the way I kind of processed what was going on at the time. So the show totally changed because it was going to be something completely different. And when she was passing, I just changed everything. So after my mother passed away, I had a lot of things I needed to try to figure out, and my go-to default has always been just to make work about it. When it's something I can't really figure out or really understand, I usually make work to try to process those understandings. So with the passing of my mother, I did a series of these giant drawings of cars. Like I just kept drawing this car over and over again. I have like 5 or 6 of these, and they're all about this size. And that was my way of just kind of like getting into my headspace, or kind of getting out of my headspace really, and just kind of focusing all my attention on this car and not so much on my mother really. But it all was all completely connected, you know? I think it helped a lot. Because instead of just like kind of sitting around and being like sad or, you know, full of grief, like I was thinking about all these like weird experiences and these weird journeys and this silly car that I spent the bulk of my childhood in the back of. And the funny thing is, in those trips I would draw a lot. That's what I would do, which is kind of interesting to think about who I am now. What I do, I draw all the time. So it's like those trips kind of inspired or created this person that draws all the time. And that's kind of how I guess I always process things, was through drawing. So I think a favorite stop of my mother's was Lake George in upstate New York. We went there quite a bit. It was a little pricier, so we didn't go as often as she probably would have liked. But I know that when we got there, it was just like everything was off, and it just was like she would just turn out and just relax, you know. She always seemed really peaceful when we went up there. And I think that's why we initially came to Arkansas, was because Arkansas, especially Hot Springs area, is very reminiscent of Lake George. And I think that just kind of made her feel comfortable. In this show, there's a lot of postcards and pennants, and I think that's because those are the two things that I was able to always get at souvenir shops. I think it was because it was inexpensive, and they were kind of kooky and weird. And so I actually, at a young age, was starting to collect these things because it was just like these little tokens from all these trips. And looking back on like how weird all these places were, and kind of like unexciting these postcards are, you know, and these images. And so I wanted to include photographs my mother took of me, where she would just be like, go stand in front of that field, or go stand by that big anchor, or whatever it was. And I would just go stand there and take my picture, and then be like, all right, and we'd get back in the car. And the funny thing is, in a lot of these photographs, there's a little peek of the car, like a corner of it, or like it's in the background somewhere, like it's there. It's like, oh, that's funny. You know, it was one of us. It was me, my mom, and this car. You know. I thought that was, in all honesty, I thought that'd be a good break from this show where it accidentally became way more personal. I didn't think of it that way. I just thought it was a way to break from like drawing. I was like, what can I do? And I was like, it'd be really cool to do these like family clumps of photographs, you know? I mean, it's a collaboration show entirely. It's a collaboration show between my mother and I, you know, which is kind of interesting to think about, you know? But yeah, she took all the photographs, so she gets credit for that for sure. And she inspired the entire show. So I guess this is my mother's show. She just used me as her vehicle. Yeah. So with this show, I wanted to include some kind of altarpiece. Like, I thought that was really important to do. And I decided to take this corner and just kind of create a memorial in a sense to her. And so it's just full of shells and objects and lots of tchotchkes and stuff like that. And my mom was raised very, very heavy Catholic, so it was always part of my life. She didn't practice it a lot as I got older. It wasn't really part of our life, but the imagery was always around, always part of my life. So I wanted to make sure that was included too, because this kind of sums up what my mom's house was like growing up, you know. Lots of things, lots of shells, lots of little tchotchkes. And I thought she would like this, so I put it together. So that sculpture was a big part of my mother's life, because in the 1964-65 World's Fair in New York, it came from the Vatican to New York, to Queens. And my mom was living in Queens. My mom grew up in Queens. And she was like 15 or 16 when it came, I guess. And she went and saw it like 5 times, and it just changed her life. And she always talked about how beautiful it was and how powerful it was, and it was just the most gorgeous thing in the world. And it came all the way from the Vatican to her neighborhood, you know. And so that was always this like topic of conversation. Whenever art would come up, she would always talk about that, like how beautiful it was and how powerful it was. And when I was going through stuff, that was an image that kept coming up, and I thought like how powerful an image too of it's, you know, the Mother Mary picking up her son from the cross, you know, like in this bond, you know. My mother was always really supportive of my work. Like whatever I was doing, she always wanted to hear about it and see it. And when I was younger, she encouraged me to make work all the time. I think she knew it was a way for me to kind of like process things. I'm an only child, and she was a single mother, so it was always just she and I. And I think she saw it as like a good outlet, like just like, you do your thing, you make your art, and then you show it to me. I want to see what you're doing. She was always really curious to see what I was up to, in a positive way, not like in a, what are you doing? It was more of like a, this is great, what's next? This is great, what's next? Like that kind of thing, you know? So I think she would really love the show. I think she probably wouldn't love the topic. She probably would think that wasn't a very good topic, but she would love what happened here, and that's what I wanted to be. I wanted it's a show for her, you know, as much as it is a show for me. The bond between my mother and I was like beyond tight. My mom, throughout her life, had a lot of loss, and a lot of things has happened. And I think when I came around, she's like, nope, you're not going anywhere. Like, you're sticking with me. So like, I was always connected to her. Like, my entire childhood, like she was, now I guess they call it helicopter mom, but she was just like, she was my mom. You know, we were companions, we were sidekicks, so everything she did, I did. Everything I did, she did. Photographs of my mother, right? So that's her first communion, that's her when she's a little baby walking down the street, that's her in front of her old house. And like, I wanted to use these images of her as a kid, right? Because that's the same age as I was when I was in the back of this car. But I also wanted the images to be kind of distressed and like gnarly and like speak of like what happens when you have dementia, how your memory starts getting broken and faded and like lost and kind of all over the place. And so that's why when I did photo transfers and I beat them up, like I sanded them down and I just messed them up and I scratched away at them, I peeled things off because I wanted it to be this like, it needed to be gnarly because the end was gnarly. The end wasn't pretty, you know, so. I wanted this work to represent it, so I wanted to celebrate but also talk about the idea of what was going on, like this memory loss and like all the gaps and all the holes and like what was real and what wasn't real and who was who and what was what. And that's kind of what this show is too. It's me trying to figure out what was real, what wasn't real. Like I have these photo proof, but then I have these memories, but who knows if that memory is really what I think that memory to be. So it got kind of in this rabbit hole of just like memory and thought and like what we remember and what we choose to remember, you know. But I wanted the images to be kind of rough because I wanted it to depict what I think, I can only imagine what she was dealing with the past 6 years, you know. You know, I used Polaroids as tags because it's just something that, like, when I was in the back of this car, that was something else I did. Polaroid was way more common back then and way less expensive than it is now. And I would just take Polaroids of things. That was my like kind of thing I would do. And so when I was thinking about how I wanted to show this show, I guess, I went to this like, oh, I'm gonna make copies of Polaroids that I have. So these are all copies of Polaroids that were in boxes. So I have a little machine that makes copies of Polaroids. So I made copies of them, and that's what I used to talk about each one of these trips. So the ones that are stops in our journeys are photographs of the car. And then ones that are images of my mother is photographs from my mom, my grandma, when my mom was pregnant with me. So it's me, my mom, my grandma. So I thought that would be kind of a nice little thing to do. And then my biopic is my mom and I when I was like 6 months old, or I guess a year old, to be honest. So I was told I needed the bio for the show. So I was like, I have the perfect bio, and it's just a photograph when I was a baby with my mom. And I was like, there you go, that's all you need to know. No one cares what school I went to, you know? Art has always been really important to me, and it's through music and paintings and photographs and dance and whatever it is, you know? I just think it's a good way, for me personally, to understand the human condition and like try to figure out why I am who I am, why I do. And that's why I always encourage people to come look at shows and look at art, and art that doesn't even connect with them, like, because you may find something in that speaks to you, and it gives you a better understanding of maybe the world we live in, or the way that we act, or why we do the weird things that we do, you know? It's the human experience. I think art is one of the purest forms of human experience, because it's someone just kind of putting out their brain to the world to see, you know? Books, music, and visual art has always been a major part of my existence. And I think it's just because I'm always trying to figure out who I am and what I'm doing. You know, initially, this show was about a car because that's how I was going to deal with it. You know, it wasn't going to be about my mother, it was going to be the show about a car. And then, because I don't necessarily historically do a lot of personal work, and then I started going into it, and I really dropped the veil of like caring about if this is too much information, if this is too personal, if anyone can connect with this. I didn't really care anymore. I was more about like, I just need to get this off my chest, I need to do this show, and it's going to be important to me, you know? The interesting thing to that story was the night of the opening, there were so many people that came here that had zero connection to me in my childhood, that had these connections with the images or the ideas or this car. There was like 4 people that came in and told me like, oh my gosh, that was my first car, or like I had that car, and I was like, that's strange, you know? Or like places, like I learned that someone that I know fairly well that grew up in Lake George, New York, and I had no idea, like stuff like that. And it was like, well, this is weird, you know? Or like penance, like, you know, people talking about penance. I thought that was interesting, you know? Also the play on the word penance and like penance, you know, like the double meaning of that in this show, you know, like thinking about like things I could have done differently at the end of my mother's life, like that's my penance, you know, and these are my penance, you know, of our trips. And just like this show I think was really important because it kind of made me just like not be scared to just think about things, you know, and get things out there. Style of this work in this show, the drawings in the show, I joked around and said I'm not going to sell any drawing classes with this show, but like I wanted to have that style, and like obviously a little more advanced, but the style of like a kid drawing in the back of a car, you know, like, and these like weird little moments in these places, and like these like, you know, like a whale from this place, you know, like these hex symbols from Lancaster, like they were everywhere, like just like these moments and these icons of travel, you know. But I wanted to have the style of a kid's drawing in a book, you know. I didn't want to have this like refined, finalized piece. It should look gnarly, and it should be a little rough, and like maybe the lines aren't a little straight, maybe things are a little off, or like, and I wanted that because I wanted to reflect like in, you know, an 8, 9-year-old kid in the back of a car, you know, drawing a picture from something that he just saw, you know, or participated in. Like I like to say to this space, this is my 3rd show in this gallery, and like I absolutely love showing in this space because 1, everyone I work with is always incredible, but 2, like it just gives me this freedom to kind of do whatever I wanted to do. It's not necessarily like a sales-driven show. It's not like I'm trying to like make work to like put food on my table. It's more of like, this is a show that I get to just kind of, what do you want to do, Michael? What do you want to put out there? You know, and that's why when I did this, I was like, oh, I know what I'm doing here. You know, like I have amazing representation, but like this show needs to be one giant thing kind of to itself. And this space gave me an opportunity, and I'm very thankful for that, you know. And I hope I can show here again in the future. I really love showing in the space. This show was probably one of the hardest, easiest shows I've ever done. And it was because it came real fast, because my deadline went from like, it was like, oh, I'm doing this now, and I have like 3 months to figure it out. So everything in this room I did in the past, you know, 3 months or whatever, 2.5 months. And so that was hard because of the amount of work and the labor that I was putting into it. And then the other hard part was figuring out how I wanted to say it, where it was going to be. Like, what are these pictures going to be like? Are they going to be on panel? Are they going to be on paper? Are they going to be framed? Are they going to be unframed? But then, once it hit, it just flew out of me. Like, I did this show so quick, and it doesn't cheapen the show at all. It's just like, I was just on it. And it was like this moment where I was like, here it is. It's that moment that we all dream of when we're making work, to be like, just like get into the zone, as they say. You know, that's kind of where I was with this show, because it's my mother. You know, it's like, it was easy, you know? Yeah, I'm proud of it, and I think this is important, and I'm grateful that I was able to do it so soon too. It wasn't like years later I was like, I'm gonna do the show with my mother. It was like literally like, let's do it, let's figure this out, you know? I think if my mom saw the show, she would love it. She would laugh, she would think it was fun. I don't think she'd be happy that it was a show about her death, but like I think she'd be happy that like I did this, and this is how I'm dealing with it. I'm not sitting around like moping or being sad. I mean, I am, but like I'm also doing this, and it helps kind of just get it out, and I think she'd be proud of me for that. First turn that I guess I wasn't thinking about was like the amount of people that have been like in a situation with a parent who had like vascular dementia or, you know, some sort of dementia, and that was interesting to have people open up to me, like people I did not know coming up to me and just kind of just talking about their journey and what they like, what, you know, and asking me questions, and I was like totally fine answering, which is also kind of works. I'm usually a very private person, and so that was interesting. And then just people connecting with places that they saw, or, you know, childhood things. They're like, yeah, you know, my mom used to do this, or my mom and dad always did this, or, you know, as a kid I never went on road trips and I always wanted to. I think it's interesting that that's how you spent most of your youth, you know. And it was all day trips. Like we never went far. We lived on Long Island, New York at the time. So it was just, you know, 2 hours here, 4 hours here was the max drive. Florida was the big trip, and that would be like in the summer we'd do it. But otherwise it was like just Pennsylvania or Connecticut or Massachusetts or something like that, which is easy. It's just a day trip. But I guarantee when I was like 8, I was like, I don't want to go to Pennsylvania. Like, this is stupid. I want to stay home. Like, you know, but like, yeah, we had fun, and it was like, there was laughter and magic and all that. But there was also a lot of like me probably being like, dude, I'm so not. And now in hindsight, I'm like, thank you, Mom. That was rad. You know, like, you know, I don't know what you were running from. I don't care. You know, but I just know every weekend you were like, let's go, come on. You know, I'm off. Let's go. Pack a bag, get in the car. And I just be like, there's no sense fighting. Just be like, all right, let's go.